Welcome to Live with Marketers, our award-winning LinkedIn Live broadcast series exploring industry trends and future-forward views of the marketing landscape with some of the brightest minds in the B2B arena. My name is Alex Rin. I'm a senior content marketing manager at LinkedIn. And I'm broadcasting. I wish I was broadcasting to you today from LinkedIn soon. Today I'm broadcasting to you from my apartment in sunny San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining today's episode, where we'll cover workforce trends we're seeing as markets open back up, the implications for new commercial opportunities, the role of marketing in winning top talent, and more. It's my pleasure to welcome today's speakers, Cali Schweitzer, Senior Marketing Editor on our LinkedIn News team, and Paul Coe, Head of Policy Research and Insights here at LinkedIn. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I'm beyond excited to hear the insights your respective teams have uncovered on today's topic of post-pandemic brand building. Would love for each of you to introduce yourself and tell us, as is tradition here at LinkedIn, something that is not on your LinkedIn profile. Cali, we'll start with you. Ladies first.
All right. I'm Cali Schweitzer, Senior Editor here at LinkedIn, where I cover the marketing industry for our editorial team, which is a team of 76 journalists in 16 countries. I'm so excited because I am talking about marketing, which is my favorite thing to talk about. I write a weekly newsletter that is a must-read, in my opinion, called Marketer Must Read, and I interview a different CMO every week. So thanks so much for having me, Alex.
Of course. Paul, over to you.
Sure. I'm Paul Coe. I'm a data scientist at LinkedIn. I lead a global team of economists and data scientists, and my group researches issues on the global workforce from LinkedIn's incredibly rich data set of 750 million plus members on LinkedIn. Now, we have millions of members that update their profiles every day on LinkedIn, and they indicate where they've moved, providing signals what skills they have, what job they may have taken, to what employer they're at, or if they've moved to a new city or country. And from all of this information, we can do things like analyze the hiring rate in real time and in much more detail than you can get anywhere else. So my team uses this for social impact, and we work with organizations all around the world, such as the New York Mayor's Office, the World Bank, to the European Central Bank, and we love providing insights on the economy.
Amazing. Again, super lucky to have you both, and thank you for those intros. Let's talk about why we're here today. We have a lot of information to cover, and a lot of it will be new. So a lot of it was new to me, so I'm excited to share it. I'm not sure if you've all heard the talk about the quote unquote Great Resignation or the big shift, but everyone's been talking about it, from the Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, Bloomberg, Forbes, Fast Company, and a lot of it is based around the workforce trends data that we're seeing at LinkedIn and Microsoft that point to a large-scale global talent migration. One of the main data points that we're discussing comes from the 2021 Microsoft Work Trend Index that says that 41% of workers globally are considering a job change in the next 12 months, with 46% planning to make a major pivot or career transition. In fact, our own CEO at LinkedIn, Ryan Roslansky, posted about the shift just yesterday, and he referred to it as, quote, the Great Shuffle. It's an unprecedented moment in history of work where all of us are rethinking not just how we work, but why we work. To me, he wrote, this is a great thing. More people be doing work they love at companies they feel passionate about, leading to greater success for organizations who engage their employees with empathy and trust. Now, for companies just beginning to recover financially from the pandemic, this level of attrition could mean a drastic loss of productivity from vacant roles and high costs of hiring. A battle for talent, as we call it, occurs when the number of vacated or new roles outweighs the number of active job seekers, forcing employers to compete with other brands for new hires. So within this broadcast, we'll outline why one of the strongest defenses to attract future talent is to invest in your brand's equity today. Now, as I mentioned, the LinkedIn and Microsoft data indicate a massive wave of change to the post-pandemic labor market. I do want to be sensitive, acknowledging that the COVID-19 pandemic is still surging in many parts of the world, and we're in no way implying that we're out of the woods. We are providing you with the latest data as markets begin to recover and emerge. Now let's get back to that stat. So 41% of workers globally are considering leaving their current employer in the next 12 months. So that's nearly double the job searching intent that we typically see. So I want to kick off the conversation by posing this question. I'll start with Cali. What do you think are the main drivers here?
Alex, you mentioned Ryan's post earlier, the idea of why we work. And that's something that increasingly comes down to consumer values and employee values. Does my company's values align with what it is that I stand for? And does my company do as it actually says? People are increasingly prioritizing the idea of aligning with brand purpose when it comes to making their choices. If a company isn't in alignment with what they want, they're looking elsewhere.
Yep, that totally makes sense. Paul, what do you think are the main drivers?
And I think we've all heard anecdotally about the tremendous amount of burnout individuals actually seeing in the labor market. So that's no likely a small part of why people are actually looking to switch employers. But what doesn't really get talked about is that layoffs, eclipsed all the natural attrition activity that had happened over this last year. So many people put off any job changes, any sort of natural attrition that we were likely to see over the past year and a half completely subsided. So there's all this pent up activity in terms of, and also desire to actually change jobs as well. So all of this means that there's a huge opportunity in terms of brand loyalty, in terms of rethinking career priorities and also employer priorities. And a lot of this is change is driving some tumult in the labor market as well.
Exactly. All great points. And we'll get into brand purpose and what I think you're mentioning, which is kind of like sheltering in job because we're uncertain of what the future brings. Those are all drivers. We'll kind of do a double click into each of those specifically a bit later on. But we'd like to hear from you, our audience, on what you value the most from an employer. So the poll question is, what do you value most? A, flexible arrangements. So work from home, come into the office when I want, work at a different location, whatever. B, relationships and culture. If you have a hashtag work bestie or work wife. C, compensation and benefits, always obviously top of mind. Or D, brand purpose, which we mentioned in a bit. And we'll give you a couple seconds to respond. What do we have any predictions of what we think is going to come out on top?
Paul, what do you think?
I can't wait to see. I'm going to wait and see in some of the data.
I think flexibility is going to be absolutely crucial. As much as I want to say brand purpose with that hat on of what marketers are thinking, I think that what's most important is that people feel that they are trusted to work in the way that they are most productive and that they feel most comfortable. I think that's what makes employees feel the most supported by a workplace, is that trust and autonomy.
I think trust and autonomy plays a lot into it too. And I think that flexibility is extremely important as well. But I'd hope to be surprised as well by some of the respondents as well.
Yeah, so the results are in, and I am actually surprised because C won, B won. So relationships and culture, that came in number one. Second, flexible work arrangements. Third, comp. And fourth, brand purpose. So the relationships and culture seem to matter quite a bit, which is not a shock, but surprising that came before compensation and benefits. All right, let's dig into the workforce trends data a bit more in order to contextualize Microsoft's findings on job seeker outlook. We cross-referenced it with LinkedIn's Workforce Confidence Index, which surveys about 5,000 US-based members to uncover talent migration trends in store for 2021. And we uncovered a couple of main points I'd like to discuss with Cali and Paul today. The first being that, as Paul mentioned briefly before, attrition spikes were postponed this year because of a shelter-in-job mindset. 6 million less folks resigned in 2020, and 74% of the U.S. workforce is, like I said, quote unquote, sheltering in job. Paul, I want to direct this question at you. What do you think sheltering in job really means?
Now, sheltering in job, for me, what this means that job seekers are postponing job changes until they see the market stabilize, they see things stabilize. As they feel safer, meaning if they feel safer going into the office, as they feel safer going outside and interacting with other folks, they're going to feel more comfortable in terms of actually making a job change. So over the past year and a half, yes, a lot of employers stopped hiring, but also a lot of job seekers stopped changing jobs and stopped looking voluntarily for other opportunities. Now, they've actually postponed a lot of these changes. And so they're waiting to see what happens to the economy. They're waiting to see what happens with return to work and what actions employers are taking. And so all of this is leading to a greater surge in activity that we're seeing on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And as you mentioned before, your team heads up the LinkedIn Workforce Report. So I wanted to ask from that in regards to like people job hopping or whatnot, is there a seasonality in this? When do we typically see attrition and hiring happen the most?
No, absolutely. So for those of you not familiar with the LinkedIn Workforce Report, this is a report that my team puts out on a monthly basis in the US, UK, and pretty soon Canada and France. But we analyze trends that are actually happening in the workforce. What we see in the US is that hiring rebounded significantly. So the labor market in the US is showing considerable strength. It's near pre-pandemic levels. That means employees have a lot more confidence and bargaining power in terms of the options they have available to them. So the natural seasonality that we see, we see talent attrition sometimes in the August, October timeframe, at least on LinkedIn. And if you look at some of the hiring in May 2020, so last year in May 2020, that was when we had some of the lowest hiring activity during the pandemic. Now, LinkedIn's data, what we were actually able to see, we saw that national hiring was almost 1.5 times higher compared to May 2020. So May 2021 to May 2020, you see that hiring is almost 1.5 times higher. So you can be sure to check out some of the more detail on the LinkedIn Workforce Report. So you can just go down to the link that's below. But that you're showing considerable strength in the hiring market.
And Paul, from this data, what do you think are the implications for new commercial opportunities?
So as you might expect, the growth in that hiring is somewhat uneven. So certain industries have been hiring more than others. And you see that recreation and travel is on top. Entertainment is a close second, in retail. So these are all industries that have seen that were hardest in the pandemic and coming back quite a bit during this time. So supporting those industry and their hiring needs is certainly an area that is going to be an area for new opportunity. The industries that were also able to transition to remote work during the pandemic, software and IT, corporate services, they're going to continue to see strong rates of hiring too.
Interesting. From a marketer's perspective, Cali, can you speak to any behavior changes that may impact the way that marketers market based on these commercial opportunities?
Yeah, recreation and travel is going to be a huge opportunity for marketers. As Paul showed with the increase in hiring, this is really a moment where that increased consumer confidence is going to be showing as we see more and more people traveling. Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky recently said, business travel is never going back to where it was, but recreational travel, we may see that as higher than ever. And so I think this is a moment when the airlines, hotel lines, everything in the experience world is going to be saying, we're here, we're open for business, and we're spending a lot of money on marketing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Moving on to the second point from our research is all about motivators. So typical motivators to stay in a role, such as interest in work, promotions, and pure relationships, from our data was significantly lower in 2021. Now, based on the poll results, it looks like we have a mixed bag here. But in general, less folks are reporting truly enjoying the nature of their work, and they're citing that they're just kind of performing well enough to get a promotion. So this might be because brand purpose appears to be taking a center stage when folks are making decisions. And in fact, 52% of employed Americans say that companies they want to work for changed during the pandemic. So, Cali, why do you think that brand purpose is so important now?
It goes back to the idea of people wanting to align with a company's values. I recently spoke with the CMO of BlackRock, Frank Cooper, and he said the best talent believes that they deserve to work somewhere where they are contributing to something larger than them, something greater than them. He said purpose is singular. It's why your company exists. And everybody wants to know how they ladder up to that. We talk often about a North Star, a company North Star. That's tied into brand purpose. How do I personally impact the North Star? That's something that every single employee wants to know.
Yeah, exactly. And not to be morbid, but we've all been, locked up for the past year and a half, and people have kind of reassessed what is more meaningful to them and how they want to spend their time with the time that they do have. So
absolutely.
It totally makes sense. And what role do you think, I want to shift to talk a little bit about more employer branding. So what role do you think employer brand plays in the decision to stay or go?
It's absolutely huge. The poll results show relationship and culture. You could argue that culture is employer brand. What we've seen is that employer brand and consumer brand are now the same thing. There is no divide anymore. It used to be that internally your company might act one way, but externally it would say it's totally different. That doesn't fly anymore because your employees are your loudest megaphone. They can be your first line of defense, or they can be your biggest problem in saying, hey, no, this is actually how it is internally. And that's something that's going to be increasingly coming up, is this idea of, does a company practice what it preaches? Does its insides match what it's saying outside?
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree that employer brand and culture are almost the same thing now. Like you said, employees can be your biggest megaphone, and they can be your greatest brand advocates if they're treated well. Because if employees are treated well, they're going to talk about it. If they're not, they're going to talk about it. So yeah, it's all part of one and the same. Paul, what do you think? What role does employer branding play in the decision to stay or go?
Yeah, as Cali mentioned, there's an incredible number of factors that actually play into employer brand. So it's very complex nowadays. So many things are tied up into an employer brand. So some of our research shows exactly what some of the impacts are for employer branding and what that means for retention and also talent attraction. So in some of our research with Glint, and Glint is a firm that surveys their employees to pulse, what the sentiment is among their employees. We found that job seeking activity was significantly lower among firms that had stronger employer brands. So this means that employer brands with that are much weaker show that higher levels of job seeking activity. This is something that directly impacts a company and their ability to retain and attract talent.
Yeah. So how employers are perceived matters quite a bit, is what we're hearing. Yep. And as a side note, not only are people kind of faced with their own mortality or existential crisis, but the collective level of debt went down in 2020 more so than in past decades. So folks have perhaps the confidence and the funds to make a pivot to something that is more purpose-driven at a brand that is making them happy. Sorry.
I was just going to say that something else we're recently seeing that LinkedIn arguably started is this idea of a spring/summer break. Bumble just announced that they are giving their employees a week off. Roblox announced a spring break. LinkedIn did something similar. And that's a great example of your employer brand giving you such a halo externally. People say, wow, that company really cares about its people. That's the best marketing that you can have. Other people talking about you.
Yeah. And I know that all of our employees were sharing about it on Instagram, and I was definitely, my friends were definitely jealous. And all of my friends know about what a great company LinkedIn is. This is not an ad for LinkedIn, but I'm just saying, like, I do talk about it, and it is great that we have those kind of perks. We're super fortunate. So recently, Apple released a memo about return to work, and its workers, its employees, issued a letter in response pushing back on the company's back to campus plans. How are we seeing remote work flexibility play into employer brand? And I'll direct that question over to Paul.
Sure. So remote work definitely plays into employer brand. As Cali mentioned, the numerous factors that actually go into employer brand. I think remote work is definitely one of those components as well. And remote work has been kind of evolving from just this perk that certain companies offered into something that is common. I mean, we've seen this over the past year and a half. And we've seen that same growth in the job postings in LinkedIn. If you look at job postings on LinkedIn, what we actually can look at, 1 in 50 job postings a year ago mentioned any sort of thing around remote work. Now 1 in 10 actually offer remote work explicitly in the job postings. So we're seeing early signs that these job postings are getting a lot more attention. They're getting a lot more job applicants as well. And so that strong association with the brand also matters.
Absolutely. And, all that being said, yes, flexible work options are important, but the value props to compete and winning top talent has also evolved quite a bit. So, Cali, I think I'll ask you, how do you think that they've evolved?
Well, I think it comes down to this idea we talked earlier about trust and autonomy, flexibility, this sense of employees want to be your best advocate and your greatest megaphone. And so do they feel comfortable talking about what your company is, what it does, their role in it? I would say, I think increasingly we're going to see marketing specifically focused on showcasing an internal culture and how that works externally. I think Peloton is a good example here. They work so hard to make clear that their internal community among the instructors, among the staff, is interconnected with the external community. The idea of together we go far, that means everyone. I think that's something we're going to increasingly see is upping the employer branding marketing so that people feel as though, whether it's from a recruitment of talent perspective or from a consumer purchasing perspective, people feel as though they are part of something.
Yeah, I completely agree. I am a big SoulCycle fan, so I just have to mention that because you threw in Peloton. So I had to be the voice for them. But they do the same thing. They create a community. You feel like you're part of something greater than yourself, and that's really important, especially now, more than ever. I think the other interesting component of all this is that with flexibility, and there's conversations about like trust and autonomy and how much is too much and whatever. In the midst of all this, it has arisen that like hustle culture is no longer cool, and burnout isn't a badge of honor. Maybe it's something, no offense, boomers, but maybe it's something that the boomer generation had adhered to. But given all of the trauma that we've been through over the past year and a half, I think that that's something that we're no longer willing to adhere to.
Yeah, the role of work in our lives has changed tremendously. And I think to your point about hustle culture, that used to be a recruitment strategy. Recently, the CEO of Shopify, Toby Lütke, an email that he sent back in 2020 was revealed by Business Insider, and it talked about how he believes that this idea of family and colleagues being intertwined is preposterous, in his words. He said emphatically that those two things should never be compared. Whereas recruitment strategies for companies are oftentimes, we are a family. People use language inside internal company culture around the team, the family. And I think that that's something that's going to be interesting to watch, is how that language as well as how that marketing evolves. Are you positioning your place of employment as a place that is a team culture or a family culture?
Absolutely. And it seems that, obviously, based on the conversation, the strength of your employer brand will determine whether you win or lose in the post-pandemic job market. So I kind of want to move on to so what, or how marketers on the line can help their companies. So I'll start with the question. Whoever wants to go first, or you're more than welcome. The question is, how can brands improve their employer brand and market themselves better?
Paul, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think offering flexible work options is one example where that's extremely important as well. But also making sure that retention purposes, making sure employees are engaged, making sure that they serve purpose as well is extremely important as well. Over this past year and a half, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we've reevaluated many of our priorities, that we've reevaluated the way we want to be working as well. And our relationship with our employers has definitely changed during this time. So making sure that the employers also shift along with the times to shifting attitudes and shifting perspectives, that this will be extremely important for organizations too.
I would say do before you say. This is something that is so often reversed in marketing. The idea of saying we're going to do something and then possibly never doing it. That's where I think a lot of the industry challenges are around accountability. And people say, well, marketers have said they're going to be making these commitments, but they're not. Same with companies. My company said they were going to be doing this, but they're not. That's where I think this is really going to play out over the next year, is the companies that actually hold themselves accountable and do what they said they would do.
Exactly. And on the opposite side of things, what do you think it means for companies? What are the potential consequences for organizations if they don't start to lead with doing, if they aren't offering, if they're taking a hard stance on you must come into the office, people that just aren't prepared for these shifts, what do they face in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sheltering in place is not just people waiting and seeing what's happening in the economy, waiting and seeing what's happening with their health and whether they feel safe, but it's also waiting to see what their employers are going to do as well. So you're talking about employers and organizations that risk being left behind in all of this. After, as Cali put it, you're putting your money where your mouth is. If you don't lead with your actions as well, then you're potentially looking at a lot of job seekers looking elsewhere to join an organization that can better serve their interests as well.
Yeah. And unfortunately for employers, or fortunately, the employees and the job seekers now have the upper hand. So it is the duty of a brand to make sure that they are, if they weren't already, to provide flexibility in all the areas that we discussed. What are some other examples of how organizations can prepare for the flight of the job seekers? Obviously, if a lot of folks leave, they need to attract new talent. They need to that the productivity still remains somewhat high. So what are some examples of how organizations can prepare?
Paul, should I start that one, or do
you? Why don't you add in a few comments? I certainly have a few thoughts on this as well.
Yeah. So I think one thing that's going to be really key is establishing internal alignment. There's so much that has been happening, and specifically within marketing and communications, there's been so much flowing around and so much change. I interviewed the CMO of Bear Health, Patricia Corsi, and she said that there is no playbook in marketing, right? Well, the most important thing is that somebody feel comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that if nothing else, this past year has been incredibly uncomfortable for all of us. So as we go back into a new normal, as cheesy as that sounds, getting internal alignment and making sure that both employees and leaders are bought in on what the future looks like, and whether that's in regard to flexibility or in regard to messaging and what the plan is externally. I think that's going to be absolutely critical. And as we all know, you can't say something once and expect people to hear it. You have to say it over and over again. And that's going to be really important going forward.
Yeah. And to your point about alignment, I think, the CMOs and the CHROs must be in lockstep. The world of marketing and talent acquisition has never been more intertwined. And obviously, candidates are more likely to respond to employers that they know of, which lowers the cost of talent acquisition. So there you go.
Yeah.
Paul, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add?
Yeah, and definitely first movers in the space. The ones that actually show true leadership are the ones that are definitely going to be associated with many of these sort of things. So the sort of wait and see approach that many employers are taking to see that could backfire. That could also outlining specific policies, outlining specific commitments, but failing to live up to them as well can backfire in a tremendous way. And so what you will also see among job seekers and employees as well is that they're looking for firms to take leadership during this time and to actually demonstrate a real commitment. You see flexible work policies that employees that didn't go far enough, and employees have to backtrack as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And thinking, Cali, you mentioned Peloton. The way that they bring brand purpose, make you feel part of a community. I'm wondering if we can provide the audience with some other examples of campaigns that companies can embark upon to improve their branding. Like, for example, elevating their leaders and giving more access, visibility into what the company culture looks like by, for example, like the CMO regularly contributing to the blog or that kind of content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your people are your marketers, and that means everybody. That's from the CEO to the person who just started the job and is 3 days in. I think that the visibility of different leaders and different talent specifically is so critical to painting a picture of what an employer really looks like. And this is something that Edelman often talks about, the idea of belief-driven buyers. People who shop based on their values. People who will say, I am buying Ben & Jerry's ice cream because I believe in what they stand for, and I am not going to patronize this other brand that doesn't stand for what I stand for. That's something that's hugely important. And I think the best way to showcase values is to put your leaders and your entire workforce on display. It's not just about putting the people on top on a pedestal. It's about recognizing the work that every single person does.
Yeah, Ben & Jerry's, I should say, they're a great example of a company that has really taken a political stance on many of the social issues that we've been experiencing in this country and over the past year. And maybe it has isolated some of their audience, but more importantly, they've acquired loyal buyers for life. So I would say if it's something that you strongly believe in, like, you might run the risk of isolating some folks, but if it's part of your company's mission and vision, it's important.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you can say that with any company that takes something that's perceived as a risk. I mean, Nike and Colin Kaepernick, and there were boycotts all over, but then there were also people who said, no, I love this, and I'm going to buy my Nikes, I'm going to buy 3 pairs of Nikes today, and I'm going to buy Nikes for the rest of my life. And I think that there's always going to be that divide. And I think some brands are very certain about wanting to just stay the middle and not offend anyone. And other brands say, we believe that by leading with our values, we will actually drive more brand loyalty and drive more customer acquisition.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And actually, I'm reminded of a study we did on LinkedIn as well, when we actually look at unsolicited views to company pages to get more information about companies. And then when you survey those members, I actually try to get to more detail on why they're visiting the pages, is because they have that brand loyalty in mind. It's because that's a brand they know, they trust, they respect their values too, or they love their products as well. And so you just see an increasing importance with that brand loyalty.
Yeah, absolutely. And another role that marketers can play, we talked about how employees are the best advocates. Are there other ways that roles that marketers that are online can play in helping their companies with the upcoming battle for top talent?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of different ways that people can actually think in terms of actually being associated with a strong brand. I think the first one is to really think about, what sort of content are people actually engaging with? So it's getting a quick pulse of actually what values and things that matter. It's being very data driven. And for me, as a data scientist, when we have as much information as possible into the topics that people care about. So really getting that pulse on what individuals actually care about, what do employees actually care about. And so really understanding that and responding to those needs and confronting them head on, I think is going to be a key element to actually driving up brand loyalty on this, and especially in this challenging environment.
Yeah, absolutely. The data definitely tells a compelling story. And as we were talking about earlier, it's like essentially we're monetizing, not monetizing, but we're selling the culture. We're selling the culture. The company as the marketers are. So that's a big part of attracting top talent as well. Okay, so let's see. I wanted to ask kind of a spicy question. So given all that we've discussed here today, do we actually think that we will see a great resignation? Or is this all a little bit of an overreaction and media fodder, et cetera? Paul, I'll start with you.
I think fears of a great resignation are completely overblown. It's a little bit sensationalist, and it makes for great headlines, but I don't think that's the reality of what we're going to be seeing. So we do anticipate a noticeable uptick in employee turnover. So I think our CEO has coined this the great resignation. Actually the great reshuffle, not the great resignation. So again, I think this is a movement from just individuals just being sick of their jobs and quitting without a new job lined up into something where they really rethink their priorities and rethink some of the other opportunities they have. There's a significant number of job seekers that are actually thinking about complete changes as well. So you're talking about people making pivots from going from an analyst into pursuing a passion job and into actually being more purpose-driven into some of the employment that they're willing to obtain. So we really don't see this evidence of individuals quitting without a new job lined up, and it doesn't usually happen without a job market in favor of job seekers. But as I mentioned earlier, people have been putting off changes because of the pandemic, and that coupled with a reevaluation of priorities means that there's stronger interest than ever, and there's an opportunity to actually redefine what employment means.
Yeah. Cali, would you agree with that?
I completely agree. And I don't even have a data science degree. So I'm glad that Paul and I agree, because now I can see I'm right. I would say that I've heard not only the great resignation, the great shuffle to the turnover tsunami. And I think that this is greatly overblown. I think that there's something where many people will just be moving between companies and competitors and things where it's I was an account manager here and I'm moving over here to be a senior account manager. And I think we can't think of that as the great resignation. We know that so often millennials, Gen Z, they're switching jobs more frequently than previous generations did. And that's something that I don't think you can call the great resignation. Where I would say we will see the great resignation and where I think it is applicable is in specific industries where, as Paul mentioned, this idea of a reassessment of our values. There have been all these stories about Goldman Sachs and Barclays and people coming out with huge bonuses for employees to stay. And this sense of industry-wise, there may be bankers, there may be lawyers, there may be technology people who say, this isn't for me anymore because this lifestyle isn't for me. And I think that there's something very different between leaving an industry and just leaving a job to go to some other company, but do the same thing.
Yeah. You know what lifestyle is for me?
What?
Would be more of the European lifestyle. I want to work 3 days a week. I want to spend more time with my family. I want to travel more. But you know what? We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Is this an official plea to your boss?
Totally. This is an official plea to LinkedIn. I'm going to write a manifesto right after this project.
Perfect.
Okay, so what about boomerang workers? We have this whole boomerang culture at LinkedIn, and as do many other companies who have great cultures. People leave, people come back. So, like, thinking more in the future, after all the dust settles potentially on, post-pandemic, in a post-pandemic world, and the Great Shuffle, when the dust settles from the Great Shuffle, what do we think about, will there be a boomerang bang? Get it?
My gosh, we've entered
wow.
beyond cliche territory here. Look, I think the grass is always greener, right? And we have been sheltered in job. We have been in our same environments, our offices, living rooms, whatever it is. And I think there is going to be that sense of optimism about something elsewhere. But I do think that boomerangs are real and they will happen because people will realize that sometimes a culture is not as it seems. And I think that that's really what we'll see.
Yeah, and I do think boomerangs happen on quite a bit. I'm just looking at some of our data and what we're actually able to analyze among job seekers. People do return to a company. People do, we see this with LinkedIn, we see this with other firms too. But what I will say is that when people leave an industry, a person leaves an industry, they typically don't go back to that industry. So those moves are much more permanent. Now, Cali alluded to this, but especially with younger generations, the average tenure at employers is shorter than ever. So you're talking about increased job hopping, increased amount of exposure into different roles, and pathways into jobs are less linear than ever. So you're talking about people wanting to get more exposure to different opportunities. You're talking about an industry. If your industry doesn't come off very strong and someone decides to leave, they may have that perception will last with them for quite some time as well. So you may not be able to re-attract that talent. So boomerangs do happen, especially among firms too, but they don't. I think they don't happen to the same extent among industries too.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And thank you for sharing that data. That's super interesting. Okay, so I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions. So if you haven't submitted a question quite yet, there's still time. There's, there will be time until the end of the broadcast. So please go ahead and submit your questions and we will get to as many as we can. But for the main takeaways, I'd say, we're projecting budgets to support talent attrition to increase. And as marketers gain budget, learnings from the last year from, the Microsoft data, LinkedIn data, support the importance of leaning into empathy, accountability, transparency, which are not my favorite marketing buzzwords, but it's what the data reflects. And, secondly, the world's largest talent migration is on the horizon, and there are many ways to fill vacated, newly created roles to reduce cost per hire, but the single most powerful way is to increase your brand's equity. Any other main points to add to that, Cali or Paul, if you had like one key takeaway for those on the line listening today?
I think all of what we talked about means there is a greater competition than ever for talent, and also reevaluation of priorities among workers. And I just would emphasize that this is the opportunity to make a lasting impression to your employees, to prospective employees as well. It's a huge opportunity, and I don't think that's as I mentioned before, it makes a lasting impression as well.
I would add that anything you're thinking about externally should start internally. It absolutely has to. There has to be alignment on it, and it also has to be true to the culture. I think that's going to be something that people are really on the lookout for. Does this brand actually do what it says?
Okay, great. Perfect. Love both of those takeaways. Marketers, write them down. But hey, if you didn't write them down, this is a recorded broadcast, so we will share the recording afterwards. All right, let's dive into Q&A. All right, so we have a question from Elton. What's the best way to find potential remote talent that is aligned with my company's values?
Potential remote talent aligned with my company's values as well.
Yeah.
I think part of it is also looking at the talent profiles too. So typically, when you look at different profiles of talent, I think increasingly your employers are realizing they need to be much more flexible in terms of the backgrounds they're looking at. So just expressing that willingness and promoting that willingness of more unconventional backgrounds, I think, is really opening sort of the pool of talent that you have access to as well. And I think those are stories that aren't necessarily heard enough, especially the person that demonstrate that they have a particular set of skills and not this exact background that you were looking for. It's one that can do the job and do the job well. It's not somebody that necessarily fits a cookie cutter mold in terms of what you're looking for.
Yep, that definitely makes sense to me. The next question comes from Adam, and he asks, how will companies marry remote/hybrid work with employees' desire for community in the workplace?
This is going to be such a challenge and something that I think everyone is thinking through, especially because flexibility needs, some people will want to be in the office 5 days a week, and some people will want to be working remotely 5 days a week. And I think this is going to be something that leaders and managers have to be thinking about constantly. How do you make sure that people who are working remotely don't miss the conversation that happens after the meeting? This is going to be something that is going to be absolutely critical. From a community perspective, I would say that we're going to see a continuation of whether it's Slack rooms or LinkedIn groups or company virtual events or things like that. It's going to be on both employees and leaders to be thinking about ways to cultivate community nonstop, as opposed to just huddling around the water cooler or the coffee Keurig section.
Yeah, and just to echo on Callie's point too, it's like this really reinforces the need for inclusion as well. Many companies emphasize the diversity part. The diversity part is actually the easy part. It's like making sure you have adequate representation. Now, inclusion is an entirely different thing. It's actually making sure that they're not missing out on those water cooler conversations. They're not missing out in terms of those communities too, and making sure that you have an environment that is going to enable everybody to succeed.
Yeah, I love that. Those are all great points. The next question comes from Megan. How do I fix, enrich, or improve my company culture?
There's so much to this one. I would say that I would start with a lot of fact finding. So I would start with understanding it from multiple people's perspective. I mean, as many people as you can, understanding what they think the culture is, what it stands for, what their challenges are, because then you're going to start to see trends. I think it's really easy to say, my perspective is, and then think that applies to everybody. But that's where I would say, going back to this idea of what Paul talked about with inclusion, it's inclusion and it's belonging. And that's something that's really important when it comes to culture, is asking people, do you feel not only included, but do you feel like you belong here? Do you feel that your voice is adding to the conversation? What might make you feel differently? Because it's not just about having a coffee station or having cool conference rooms. It's not about that. It's about the sense of feeling community and feeling a sense that you belong somewhere. That is what culture really is.
And I think a lot of organizations are going to pick up on a lot of this question around culture and changing culture. As you're hiring a tremendous number of individuals, that presents a unique opportunity in making a culture shift, because new individuals bring their own sense of culture, their own sense of, like different traditions and thought processes as well. So that's a unique opportunity to change the culture and make that shift as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. With all the job hopping and the influx of potential new employees, it is a great time to improve upon things and make a shift. I also wanted to add, I know that Cali mentioned this as well, but like internal surveys here at LinkedIn, we use Glint to see how people are feeling, are a good way to see if things are aligned. And then another interesting thing that I heard the other day is the RRR test. So use the RRR test. That's fun, say that a lot, to test whether company culture holds a significant role in your workplace. You ask yourself, can you recognize it? Can you repeat it? And do you reward it? So that's a good way to test. And then another thing that I found that, again, an example from LinkedIn is as new employees come in, educating them and providing the proper training around what the culture is and how they can engage with it and buy into it. Okay, moving on. The next question, there's a lot about brand, I guess, especially within this new shift. Mark asks, how do I increase brand recognition?
I guess I would ask, are you thinking in terms of prospective employees or in terms of consumers? I'm assuming possibly both. I think that's something that's been really important for brands and marketing leaders in the last year is to say, we don't need to be everywhere. We need to be everywhere that matters. We need to be showing up in conversations that make sense for us to show up in. There's nothing worse than this idea of a brand trying to insert themselves in the zeitgeist. And I think there are plenty of examples where we see that and it just goes so wrong. It's better to say nothing than to try to be part of a conversation that you don't fit naturally into. So I think oftentimes it's hard because it's about patience. You see other brands getting so much press, getting so much recognition. You have to just stay your course. When I was talking about interviewing Patricia Corsi, the CMO of Bayer Health, she was telling me that she thinks one of the most powerful things about brands like Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia is that their consistent commitment to brand purpose means that they don't have to talk about themselves anymore. Everybody else talks about them. And I think that's something that's really crucial. Think about the value of consistency and stay the course even when you're tired.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Paul, any thoughts on that before we move on?
I think pretty much Cali mentions a lot of those key points as well. I think making sure you don't interject yourself into a conversation where you can't actually credibly add anything, or it just seems like a complete aside. That's just, it's not an authentic way. And I think we've seen a lot of evidence, especially about brands commenting on LinkedIn in contexts where it's not necessarily something where individuals see as appropriate, and it can backlash. It definitely has the opposite effect of what you intend.
Absolutely. Newsjacking just for the sake of newsjacking is not the way to go. And as a B2B marketer who markets to B2B marketers, I find that our senses are heightened for BS. Like, we just know from a mile away that something is just not authentic, or that they're just, trying to hop on the bandwagon to get more eyeballs on their content. All right, I think this might be the last question that we respond to, and it's a really interesting one. So we talk about mission, vision, and values, and oftentimes they're somewhat interchangeable. So Jen asks, what is the difference between mission, vision, and values? Or if we have any definitions that might be helpful or examples.
Okay, I suppose I'll go ahead and go first. So if I were to, I'd start from vision. So vision is the overall sort of purpose, I think, for what you want to achieve. It's not necessarily attainable in the sense, it's very aspirational in that sense. Mission, I would say, is a lot more defined. It means it's something that you can do. Things that you can be doing to actually accomplish and start to chip away at the problem too. And I'd say the values are all of those codified as well. So it's making sure that you highlight individually, what are those things that you value, your organization values, and that ladder up to that mission and vision.
I think Paul says it perfectly. And I would say that I think that's where vision may be more blue sky and mission more tactical.
Yeah.
And values just underlines absolutely everything that your company does.
I agree. Actually, we will do one more question because one just came in that I'm interested in hearing your responses to. Sorry, you're not off the hook yet. So Adam asks, who are a few leaders I can follow on LinkedIn who are getting culture right now, or even who are ahead of the curve?
I would say Meeta Malik. She is the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Carta, formerly a top marketer at Unilever. She is someone who leads in this culture conversation so much. She is active on LinkedIn every day talking about issues around brands, marketing, culture, inclusion, equity, belonging. I would absolutely recommend her. I think we'll probably have some links after this that you can have available to you, and I think we'll include Meeta's profile there, but it's M-I-T-A Malik, M-A-L-L-I-C-K.
Perfect.
In a very biased perspective to say, I would definitely follow our LinkedIn CEO as well. And Ryan Ruslansky does an excellent job in terms of actually being true to outlining his values, but also practicing what he preaches as well. So you were talking about an individual who leads an organization that is very much values driven and does this extraordinarily well.
Also, I know that they won't say it, so I'll say it for them. Both Cali and Paul are great people to follow to keep up with the latest and greatest. So there's your plug. Okay, so let's wrap up for the day. We're about at 9. I want to mention the upcoming broadcast that's happening next month in July. It's around the changing marketing jobs landscape. I'll be here as your host. We will have from our Insights team, Connie Chen, and the editor-in-chief of the LinkedIn Marketing Solutions blog, Takia Burt. We're going to be talking about things that we're seeing in terms of it's kind of like the part 2 of this conversation, but more geared specifically towards marketers in the sense that what are the top skills that companies are hiring for, and what LinkedIn learning courses you can take to upskill, and things that we found around gender in the workplace. So super interesting, similar to this broadcast, filled with a lot of original LinkedIn insights. So be sure to go ahead and register for that if you're interested. So that is all the time we have for today. I want to extend an amazing thank you, a huge thank you to our audience. Thank you for tuning in and being so engaging throughout the entire broadcast and submitting so many interesting questions. We hope that you learned something today to take back to your team. I hope we didn't scare you too much as well. So thank you to our guests, and of course, Cali and Paul. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I will give another plug to the LinkedIn Marketing Solutions blog, the one that my colleague Takia manages. Again, if you want to keep up with the latest B2B trends, I would go ahead and subscribe to the blog. Keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on what our Insights team is doing. And we'll send a follow-up email sharing some of the links to the content that were referenced here today, as well as the recording if you want to share it with any of your colleagues. All right, so I think that's all for today. Until next month, I'm Alex Rin, and I'm signing off from another episode of LinkedIn's Live with Marketers. See you very soon.